Welcome to another Lombardi Live. Today I'm really excited to have our special guest, someone who exemplifies exactly what you need to know to go from being a good drummer to being a great musician. Charlie Watts once leaned over and said to me, "Don, I'm a jazz drummer that got a rock gig and I stuck with it." And I can't think of a better way to introduce our guest today. He's a jazz drummer, he's a rock drummer. Rolling Stone ranked him as one of the top 100 drummers of all time. Not to mention being a race car driver and a fly fisherman, Jimmy Chamberlin.
Hey Don, how are you?
Had to do a little research to find out about the fly fisherman part of things, but if I got
I'm
that
gonna have
right,
to get you to introduce me to my kids someday.
there you go. You know, you're most often for the young drummers out there known obviously from the years you did with Smashing Pumpkins, but we're a little bit later. I'm going to talk about something you did, I think, in about 2014, which was a great jazz record that you put out that I listened to. And there's a lesson for you guys out there that we're going to get into. But what do you think most prepared you for the Smashing Pumpkins to be such a great drummer you were in that band? Because, you know, all the young drummers want to know, what should I be doing to get to the point where I can get to the level of these people that I aspire to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest advice I can give to everybody is just to listen to as much music as you can and really try to figure out what's compelling about it and what touches you and what you want to grab onto from an emotional standpoint and what you want to make part of your own narrative and your own storytelling. I mean, I was very lucky when I was little to grow up in a house where I was the youngest of 6 children. So I grew up in the late 60s, early 70s, which was a great time for music. So my dad was a clarinet player. So at any time in the house, you could be hearing Benny Goodman coming out of one room and The Who coming out of another room. My sister was a big Steely Dan fan, Ricky Lee Jones. She introduced me to Steve Gadd and Jim Gordon, and my brother was a drummer, so he introduced me to Tony Williams and Elvin and Art Blakey. So, you know, I never really thought of music as a kid as genre-based, right? I just thought there was good music and then there was not so good music, but I never really made any bones about whether it was jazz or rock or funk. Or my brother was a big David Garibaldi devotee, so he listened to a lot of Tower of Power. So linear drumming was a big part of his playing. So I got into that very early. He listened to a lot of Jeff Beck. So I was a big fan of Narada Michael Walden, Richard Bailey, who played on the Blow by Blow records. So just, you know, try to listen to as much music as you can and try to emulate and make your own kind of what you like, right? I think it was you and I had talked about this down where there was that famous Buddy Rich quote where he said, "The best musicians are thieves that never get caught," right?
Yeah, perfect. Exactly right.
Right. So they hear things, but they have enough of their own identity to when they play things that they've heard or they're emulating, it still sounds very much like themselves.
I recently interviewed, actually we had a reaction video that some drummers did. Thomas Lang was one, about one of his idols, Terry Bozzio, going back playing some of the early Missing Persons things and some of the Zappa things. And Terry picked out some specific fills that he played with Zappa, and he related it to exactly what he took off of Tony's record. He said, you know, it wasn't it wasn't like I was even at a point where I was making it my own at that point. Listen to those 4 bars and listen to what he did, and I copied that. And that's all part of, you've probably done that in your playing too. You know, you just almost channeling those people.
Absolutely. I mean, Tony, you know, to me is really, you know, exemplifies the whole package. I mean, Tony, my wife and I just watched the other night the 1964 September Milan concert, right? That's on YouTube, which is great. It's the one where he's kind of yelling at Herbie Hancock for playing the wrong harmony behind his solo. And Ron Carter is only 27. I think Tony is 18, and Wayne is, you know, about the same age, 25 or so. And man, the band is just cooking, right? It's just, even at that early age, the identity of the band is so intact. And you could just see that they were developing on stage, right? They were listening to each other and they were developing. Tony and Ron were doing a lot of the metric modulation and breaking the beats down in a way that really was so it was just so natural, right? When you hear go from fast swing time to quarter time without missing a beat, and the soloist just picks up on it in one bar, and it just becomes this kind of seamless journey through all these permutations of rhythm, but still subservient to the narrative of the song. I think they do Surrey with the Fringe on Top, or some type of Cole Porter or Rodgers and Hart song, and the narrative reigns supreme, right? They're all in service of the narrative. They're all telling the same story, but in such a unique way and in such a progressive and sophisticated way that it really, like, you can listen to that stuff on so many levels. What I'm attracted to in music is really things that can sound very simplistic on the surface, but be very deep on the inside, like a Thelonious Monk composition or a Mingus bass line, which can sound, rudimentary, but once you dig into it, obviously you realize that it's very complex in its harmony.
Yeah, I heard Tony play when he was with Miles, probably the second or third week. They were playing in an after-hours club here in LA, and it was talk about being the same age of somebody, and then thinking that you're making a living and you're doing okay, and then you go hear Tony Williams, like, wait, we're both 18. Like, what? How is this happening? Like, he's got to be like, in his 30s. How do you get that level of craftsmanship, not only from the standpoint of learning how to play the drums, but his musicianship? And it was part of him being just fearless, and he had an aggressive attitude, and that came out in his playing.
Well, and I also think, he was given, the latitude by Miles, who saw that there was a long journey ahead for this gentleman, right? And Miles was smart enough to go and let this kid be a kid and let him develop and give him the confidence to say, like, look, man, you got it. Like, anything you do is cool with me, so just do whatever you want. I mean, that's, for a drummer, that's a dream, right? Because then every choice you make is the right choice. And I think that creates a foundation for growth that really, a lot of drummers, a lot of musicians don't find themselves in situations like that. They work to a point of proficiency, and then they get into a gig where they're kind of relegated to playing a certain way that's maybe not rooted in self-expression, and maybe rooted in more mimicry or things like that, replication versus creation. You're talking about a guy who was given full latitude to be a creative force within the construct of another creative force. I mean, the first Tony record I ever heard was the Lifetime record with Holdsworth and Allen and Tony Newton on it. So I thought, that's Tony Williams, right? And then I went back and discovered the Miles stuff much earlier, and even the stuff with that he did with McLaughlin, later. But now I'm just, like One Finger Snap and those compositions. It's just, you could spend a whole lifetime working on the right hand of that song.
Giving somebody the freedom to express themselves, and that's the genius of a creative leader, I think.
Well, I think, you have to go into this thing thinking that, the journey of self-expression is one of self-honesty, right? And a lot of times educators and even professionals will look at somebody in terms of kind of what needs to be fixed, right? Your grip or your time or the way you approach. And for me, like, the drummers that I'm attracted to are the ones that are kind of the most idiosyncronous, right? I'm attracted more to the inconsistencies in people's playing than I am about kind of what makes them homogenous with the rest of the drummers, right? I want to hear somebody who's off the grid, who's out of the box, who's playing things that are unconventional, because that sparks new ideas in me and allows me to think that, okay, there's a possibility beyond kind of what I've been thinking of conventionally. But oftentimes, you see guys go through a series of lessons or some type of educational journey, and they come out as this kind of homogenous, finished quote unquote finished product, where they've kind of stripped the identity or the inconsistencies away from the person. Where those are the things that got me my gig, and those are the things that got Charlie his gig, and those are the things that got Chad his gig. It wasn't the things that made us like everybody else. It was the things that made us different. So I'm into guys who are like, they want those things to really shine as like, I'm proud of the individual that I am. I want to self-express in regard to that. And that's the journey I want to take as a musician.
Smashing Pumpkins, if I'm right, it was late 80s, right? When you started?
88.
88?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had dinner with Billy last night. We were talking like 33 years. I mean, we've had our ups and downs. We've quit, we've joined, we've rejoined, we've blown the band up. We've always landed back together, and we're about to release a 33-song, 3-act rock opera next year. We're going in the studio in December to record a 10-song full-on rock record, just live takes to tape. We're having the most fun we've ever had in the band because we're doing what we love, right? And we know that it has value to us, right? And we're out of this kind of game finally of these outside quantifications and these outside rules, and we're just simply creating for the joy of creating.
You were swinging with whatever you were doing in a rock environment, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yeah, and I wasn't really into a lot of rock and roll when I joined the band. I mean, I was listening to more like Tony. I was listening to Weather Report. I was listening to Peter. Peter has become a dear friend, but was one of my favorite drummers back then. So I was into I was listening to like Gino Vanelli records, right? It was like Mark Craney and Graham Lear playing drums. Like I was working on that stuff. And, when I joined the Pumpkins, it was really about the kind of end of 80s rock where it was very drum machine-y. In fact, they were playing with a drum machine. And I thought when I joined the band, I'll do a couple gigs with them, but this isn't going to be for me. And then after a couple rehearsals, Billy and I started talking. I realized that he was a Mahavishnu fan. His heart was really in progressive music, and he loved the exploratory stuff that I was doing. So eventually we just started building those records around kind of drum parts and guitar riffs. And that's when it started to become fun, which became the music that was Gish and Siamese Dream and Melancholy, which was very progressive. I mean, it was very, up to that point, alternative music really didn't have guitar solos and syncopated drum parts and drum breakdowns. And people looked at us weird when we first started doing that stuff. Like, wow, why are you doing that? And we were just like, hey, that's what we like to play.
As much as drum machines were popular back in those days, the obvious thing to me was that you can't have a conversation with one. And that's probably what Billy felt right away. Right. All of a sudden I have a drummer who's actually talking with me back and forth musically and interacting with me. And that's that's back to the listening thing again that you said earlier, how important that is.
Well, I think, it comes down to, an understanding of kind of like you and I had talked about many years ago, the kind of why of drumming, right? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? And when we understand the purpose of a composition, and we understand the destination of a lyric, and we understand the emotional underpinnings of a statement, it allows us to make choices that are congruent with the music. And I think when music is at its best, when you hear the Duke Ellington Orchestra or you hear Basie and that stuff, when they were all in on the joke, right? When they were, or Dorsey or any of those old big bands that my dad used to play nauseatingly over and over and over again in my house. But when you hear that stuff, everybody was in on it, right? Everybody started at the right spot and everybody landed at the same spot. And that's where it gave it that immense power that really, that's when I work on music today, I try to understand like what's the story we're trying to tell, because if I understand the storytelling part of music, I can make more congruent and better choices in my rhythms and my fills. I can provide dynamic shading that makes sense with the story. I can support things in a way that make the story more colorful. And I think music at its best is when everybody is telling the same story. when I play with my jazz quartet and we do night and day, it's like you need to know like what you know. Some people know the arrangement, but they don't know, they don't know the story, and that's part of that stuff. I mean, what's compelling about even instrumental music like Giant Steps or One Finger Snap or anything like that. It's like there's a congruency in the performance that everybody knows what the emotional destination of the composition is, and they all land there in their own unique way. But it makes for a really powerful listening experience.
Milestones, a great legendary track, which brings up the question, if you listen to that, the live version of it, it ends up at a much different tempo than it started out with. There was no click tracks back in those days. What is your feeling about, click tracks or Pro Tools and how it affects what the pros and cons, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything, it's like a tool, right? I used to be a carpenter. I mean, there was saws and there was hammers and there were screwdrivers. I mean, I think we look at it as like a tool. If we're making a certain type of music in a modern architecture, we'll tend to use click tracks and play on the grid, but still not manipulate drums so they can still swing. Because I move from side to side a lot. I love to pull verses back and push choruses and light bridges up and stuff like that. So, even when we do play to a click, we generally leave the drums alone. But all of the stuff, Pumpkins, like everything all the way through Zeitgeist, and even the Rick Rubin sessions was recorded straight to tape with no click. So we didn't like playing to click. Corgan wanted raw live drum performances, and there were some drum takes that he liked better than I did. And he would say, I would say, look, this part slows down too much, or this part speeds up. And he would be like, that's what I love about it. Right. So we just, we would just go and play a take until it felt good. And then that was the take. We didn't edit. Sometimes we would edit a back half or a front half or whatever, or do a Teo Macero edit here and there. But for the most part, everything you hear from Gish all the way to Zeitgeist is straight to tape, no click. And we would just rehearse until we got the tempo right to the point where it felt good. And then we would just lay down the drum take, and then Billy would fill in all the instrumentation over the top of that.
Call me old school out there, but to me that makes all the difference in the world.
I mean, if you're playing to tape and you got to get it, you're definitely in a different headspace than you're thinking like, oh, I can fix this later. And you can hear that in people's playing, right? When you're on the knife edge playing, a song like Jelly Belly or one of those crazy songs that we used to play, you're doing it, man. You're doing it, or you're doing it over.
Yeah, I like Chad Smith's definition of rock and roll. It was you're taking chances and you're trying things. They work or they don't work, but that's what rock and roll is supposed to be all about.
I mean, look, trial and error is the basis of all evolution, not just music. When a plant grows through the sidewalk, it's already tried to grow 8 different ways before it found that crack, right? When a bird's beak grows a different way, it's because of trial and error. And it's the same with music. I mean, if you want things to develop organically, then you get there in an organic way. But yeah, I mean, I like, which is what I loved about jazz. Like if you listen to Giant Steps, right? If you listen to the box set and you listen to those 5 takes, right? There's really only one take that's Giant Steps. The other ones they fail or they miss or they're not right. They just not too slow or they're too fast, but they get it, right? They get that one take that's just magic, and that's it. And that's what I love about jazz. Somebody asked me, what do you like about playing jazz? I said, well, I like it because it only takes 5 minutes to play 5 minutes worth of music.
That's perfect.
Right? I know in 5 minutes this song is going to be over and we're moving on, regardless of what happens.
And on Drum Channel, more and more, we've been using the term jazz or swing because it has a connotation to some as maybe your grandparents' music or an older style of music, but more as a genre. Jazz is a way of teaching you how to swing. Think of Charlie Watts, all the great rock drummers who are really thought of themselves as jazz drummer. We were out at dinner one night, which I said in the opening, and we were talking about Frankie Butler. Actually, I was speaking with Jim Keltner about Frank Butler, and I turned to Charlie, which was, He was a West Coast drummer that wasn't that well known. He played on X amount of records. Excellent drummer. But I turned to Charlie to explain who Frank Butler was, and he started telling me all these records that he was on that I didn't even know of. And so I said to him, how did you even know him? And he made the comment, Don, I'm a jazz drummer that I rock gig, and I stuck with it. I felt like saying, good decision, Charlie. I'm glad you didn't decide to bail on that one. but
Yeah,
it has to do with your rock drumming. If you're playing eighth notes on the cymbal, if Chad's playing eighth notes on the cymbal, if Charlie's playing eighth notes on the cymbal, you could superimpose the jazz cymbal rhythm and it would swing right along with that. We've done that several times.
Yeah, I had breakfast this morning with Matt Walker, another great drummer, for a local great drummer, and we were talking about that. And I was talking about a guy that I've been studying with, Steve Lyman, who's been coming to my house about 4 times a year and working on jazz independent stuff with me. And Steve studied with John Riley. He studied with Ari Honig. He's a great jazz drummer, really well-versed in independence. But he said, one year with John Riley, they just worked on the different ride cymbal patterns of Blakey, of Philly Joe, of Max Roach. And he came over one day and played 6 different ride cymbal patterns, all just swing time. And the differences were incredibly notable.
Yeah.
I mean, incredibly notable, where Philly was very, very much a marching type of a sound. Blakey had a real rock pocket. Max Roach had that kind of lazier pocket. It was really profound to hear the differences in all of those swing patterns and how they really made a difference in the way the music was perceived. But, my sister Laura was probably, more so than my brother, even, who was a drummer. She was so in tune to great music. I mean, she would turn me on to Mose Allison. She had Thad Jones and Mel Lewis, Central Park, like when she was 18, right? For whatever reason, I don't know, even know where she was getting these records. But I remember she brought me in to listen to Traffic, Low Spark of High Heel Boys, with Jim Gordon playing that track. And the ride cymbal shading and accents that he does on that song are incredibly world class, right? And I remember, like, Steve Lyman came over and he was asking me, like, where did you get your ride cymbal technique? Because it's so expressive. And I played him that track and he goes, yep, that's it. And I said, look, that's the type of stuff I was listening to when I was 12. I wanted to have the ability to express and emote on one part of the drum set, where a lot of guys would just play straight time, hit it in the middle, make the ride sound the same all the time. You can play 1,000 different notes in a composition just on the ride cymbal, and 10,000 different notes on the snare drum that all mean something if you understand the narrative and you're able to provide that dynamic shading underneath the story. You can cut loose with that stuff. And that's where Billy Corgan and I really connect, right? Because I'm a big stickler for knowing lyrics. I want to know what songs are about. And that way he knows when I'm reinforcing something, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm adding weight to a phrase, or I'm pulling something back that has to be more sensitive.
In the jazz environment, I asked Harold Jones this question. Do you prefer an upright bass or electric bass, or do you have a preference?
Oh, upright.
I knew that would be the answer, but I had to ask the question. Yeah, Harold Jones also, of course.
Oh yeah,
and explain to the kids out there the reason why. I think we both have our opinion on that.
Well, I just think it's more musical. I think it's more, I played with some great upright players. I played with John Benitez in New York and some other great guys that, are great storytellers in their own right. But it just creates a nice soft landing for the drum kit. And in a way that the electric kind of lives on top or in the middle of the drum kit, the upright bass lives underneath the drum kit. And a great upright bass player will allow you to stretch the time in a way that you just can't with an electric bass, which is more percussive and more kind of mid-rangey. The upright bass can have a lot more envelope in the note, and it can play a lot more legato. So with that, the time with the upright bass gets a lot wider, than it does with an electric bass, where it gets very narrow and very succinct. An upright leaves you all this room to kind of work, to wiggle around in.
Perfect.
I told John one night we played the Iridium, and it was the first time I played with John, and it was me, Frank Catalano, John Benitez on bass, and Theo Hill on piano, who plays with the Mingus Big Band. So great musicians. And I told, and John was complimenting my ride cymbal. He was saying, I love the sound of your ride cymbal, and I love the way you're playing it. And he said, am I playing okay? And I said, John, this is as close as I've ever come to being told a story by my grandfather.
Perfect.
I felt like I was sitting on your knee as a 10-year-old kid all night, being told like the greatest story of all time, because he just, upright bass, when it's done right, it's a very compassionate instrument, right? It's a compassionate instrument that's not only in service to the song, but it's in service to the ensemble as well. And those guys who do it right, like, Ron, obviously, Garrison, like those guys, it's a next, Billy Moeller, obviously, it's a next level instrument. I don't know if you've heard the new Billy Moeller stuff with Nate Wood is amazing.
No, I would love to. No, I missed that.
Oh God, you got to pick it up. I'll send it to you when we're done.
If a train's going down the track at a certain speed and you're on a flatbed, and that's the bass, upright bass, you could get it at the front of the car or the middle of the car. You're still going down the road at the same speed, but you got the latitude of hitting that breadth of where you want to be. And there's no better feeling out there than tying in your jazz cymbal rhythm with an upright bass player walking. It's just like it's the best feeling. You feel like you're kind of a leaf just like guiding through space, Oh
yeah, no, it's like dancing with your mom at a wedding. It's just good, It's like good upright bass is really, it's such an important part of that stuff. And I think granted, I mean, I'm a huge Jocko fan and was a huge, Victor Bailey and knew all those great drummers and played with the great Percy Jones a few times. And there's definitely a thing to it. But for me, like the electric is really more rooted in the fusion stuff. The more kind of Return to Forever, Weather Report stuff than it is in the old stuff that we're talking about.
One of the best lessons we have on Drum Channel, and it's one of my favorite things all the years we've been doing this, is the Gannon Arnold track when we came out and you played in Gannon's band. And I just,
oh yeah,